Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp April. She is the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is April 10th, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger. I will be your host. You can send us your comments and questions via email to questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them in the chat room. Now, despite the failure of NATO's war against Russia, in an effort which they themselves claim is a campaign in Russia, NATO leaders seem intent on not just continuing the war, but escalating it, discussing the possibility of even deploying NATO troops inside Ukraine. Now, our first question comes from someone who identifies himself as a geostrategist, and he writes, quote, "I've heard you discuss in the past the Chinese peace plan as a way to end the war. There seems to be some chatter about the positive potential of a Chinese role after the recent visit to Ukraine by a Chinese mediator. What has China proposed, and might Europe be open to that as a way to end the war?"
Well, I think, there is a lot of motion around this. One naturally most important is the state visit by Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov in Beijing, where he met with Xi Jinping, Wang Yi, and also he had a meeting with the 70 ambassadors of the Global South, or 70 ambassadors representing the Global South. And the main topic, apparently, I don't know any details, but the main topic apparently was Ukraine. Now, in that setting, I can only imagine that, Lavrov would try, based on his discussions, and Ukraine was also an issue in the discussions Lavrov had with the Chinese, that, that there is actually some motion to, bring this war to an end. There is also an article by a China expert Paul Zieren in the Berliner Zeitung today, which says that the Chinese proposal is short before a breakthrough. So these are obviously non-confirmed, and one has to be aware of, that there is always the potential for disinformation. But I think this would be a very hopeful sign to bring this war to an end before it leads to a catastrophe. And, the potential that China, which does have a positive relationship to both sides, that's very important. Naturally, they have a unshakable strategic partnership with Russia, but they also kept an open channel with Ukraine. Foreign Minister Kuleba met with Wang Yi at the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference in February, and the Chinese Special Envoy Li Hui just had a couple of weeks ago the second tour throughout Europe, meeting people in Russia and Ukraine, in Brussels, Germany, and France. So I think that there is hopefully a possibility to have such a conference, a peace conference and settlement, which I think would be extremely, because what are the alternatives? The alternative is to do what Macron recently proposed, which was flight forward, maybe a trial balloon for all of NATO, namely to move French troops into Ukraine. This has caused a complete nervousness and fury. Germany quickly made sure to say that any deployment of French troops in Ukraine would not require the Article 5 of NATO. It would be a purely French affair and not a NATO affair, because obviously Germany is very wary to be pulled into a war in Ukraine, which would be a complete disaster, is open-ended. Then there is also a recent statement by Professor Mersheimer from the United States, and he says that that the best thing Ukraine can do is to go for an agreement right now, because if the war continues, they're in danger of losing even more territory. And I'm pretty sure that the Chinese also are making a double effort to come to a conclusion, because, without a diplomatic solution, I think the Russians are going to try to have more military gains. And that is something China does not necessarily welcome, because the Chinese position is one of ending wars through diplomacy, of having a harmonious development of all nations. And naturally, they would have nothing to gain but only to lose from an escalation around Ukraine. So while this is all not certain yet, I think there is a certain hopefulness, because the similar effort or simultaneous effort tried by Switzerland to organize an international Ukraine conference, which was pushed a lot by the Europeans and Americans. This has been mostly rejected so far by Russia, because they do not think that Switzerland has a good position as a mediator, given the fact that they fully backed the sanctions against Russia. And they regarded the Swiss conference as a way of just confusing the countries from the global south. Now, there is obviously, a big geopolitical fight involved, but given the seriousness of the nature, I think the most promising proposal I can only see in what China is trying to do, because they both have the economic weight. They have, chips on all sides, so to speak, including the United States, because, with the recent discussions between Xi Jinping and Biden on the telephone, trying to reaffirm their good discussion in San Francisco a year ago, it seems that, there is at least a channel open for such discussions. And given the absolute precarious situation of the world in general, one can only welcome an effort and can only hope that this will lead to a result. So I'm modestly optimistic about this.
You're listening to Helga Zepp Larouche, and we'll take your questions. Send them to questions@schillerinstitute.org. Now, just a follow-up from the geostrategist, he said, would the Belt and Road Initiative going into Ukraine be part of a reconstruction plan if there were such a peace agreement, as opposed to leaving it up to BlackRock and the Western predators?
Well, I think, Ukraine will have the choice. Hopefully we come to this point where the war is over. Then Ukraine will have the choice to either become a weapon firm of the world, because also some German weapon factories are planning investments there. And that is not really a good idea, because that means the perpetuation of the war. And if it's not the Ukraine war, then some other war. But it will be a continuation of this endless war policy, which is haunting the world since the last several decades, as compared to the option of being integrated between East and Western Europe through the Belt and Road Initiative, and developing, the agriculture, reconstructing the entire economy, being part of the, increasing trade between Europe and Asia. So I would hope that, that part of the solution would be an integration into the Belt and Road Initiative, because, just look at the different two options of policy and foreign policy. The United States has been trying to, put all bets on military power. They built almost 1,000 bases around the world. The war machine is practically the most important driver of the economy, but has it really fulfilled American aspirations, gaining friends around the world? I would say not. It has naturally made certain strictly military alliances, but China was much more successful by trying to develop economic ties with 150 countries of the global south. And, a country, if you are a country in the global south, or Europe for that matter, you have to ask yourself, is it better for you to be a aircraft carrier for the United States war machine, or is it better to invest in infrastructure, agriculture, and industry in the collaboration with China? Now, I have been stressing now for a number of years, actually, especially since the war in Ukraine started, or the special military operation, that we have to have a system where everybody works together, and that geopolitics has to be overcome. The more I think about it, and the longer this goes, the more I'm convinced that geopolitics is the biggest evil. Because once you think that other countries are your enemy and your opponent, then everything flows from there. And on the other side, if you say, no, we have a common interest, the higher interest is the one humanity, then you can find always a diplomatic solution, economic cooperation to the benefit of all. So I think that key difference between geopolitical thinking and win-win cooperation, I think that will decide, if mankind makes it or not.
Well, as we sent out a notification that you would be talking about the attempt to escape the grasp of geopolitics, we've gotten a number of questions about geopolitics. Let me give you two on India. Thomas writes that he's concerned about India's economic policy. He thinks that the farmer demonstrations in India expose the neoliberalism of the current government, and instead of the BRICS orientation. And he asks if it's possible for India to return to the approach of Nehru and Indira Gandhi. And we also have from Charles Leon, who asks about Modi. He says, is Modi close to Israel, a friend of Netanyahu, or is he just acting that way for internal electoral concerns?
Well, I think that, the Indian policy is very difficult to evaluate at each moment, because on the one side, you do have a very strong sense of Indian independence, which goes back to the non-aligned movement tradition, which I think is not a way even with the Modi government, because if you look, for example, the recent trips of Foreign Affairs Secretary Jaishankar, he reiterated a very strong relationship with Russia. And I think that the overall orientation of the Indian government is India first. There are obviously opponents in India from the Congress Party who have a very negative view on the religious emphasis of the BJP. And, there are obviously issues there which are for the Indians to settle. A big component naturally is the very large Muslim population. I think it's 120 million, or could be even more, of Indians who are Muslims. And therefore, Modi is always very, concerned about the security implications of the relationship India has with the countries of Southwest Asia. So I would just think that the hope is that the tradition of Gandhi and Nehru and Indira Gandhi, for that matter, that lives on as a very strong identity of India. That it's India has a fantastic history. If you think about that, India is one of the cradles of humanity. They had one of the most important cultures 5,000 and more years ago. The whole period of the Rig Vedas, the Upanishad. These are philosophical, theological writings which are, in absolute coherence with some of the most important ideas of Western religion, Christianity, and so forth. They have a song of creation, which is absolutely fascinating. Then they had the Gupta period. This was the high-level literature period, 500 years after Christ. And then they had more later the Indian Renaissance, which produced such extraordinary poets like Tagore. And in any case, the Indian history is very fascinating and very rich. India is right now making incredibly important steps forward economically. They are already bypassed China in terms of population numbers. So one could only hope that, in the light of the incredible breakthroughs, which are made technologically and scientifically all over the world, in terms of space travel, in terms of space projects, where India is also one of the leading nations. And naturally, India has a very important role in the nuclear sector. They are working with many non-aligned countries, helping them to get their own nuclear energy. So I think India is a very important country. And, I can only hope that the historic tectonic change, which is taking place right now, brings about a new paradigm of international relations, which, settles conflicts, historic ethnic conflicts among nations in general, and that we really rise up to the idea of the common future of humanity, and let's work towards this end.
Okay, we have one more question on Asia. You referenced this earlier. The person writes in, given what was a positive talk earlier this month between President Biden and China's President Xi Jinping, what do you expect to come from the Biden meeting today with Japan's Prime Minister Kishida? Is this designed to consolidate Japan as a NATO ally against China?
Well, unfortunately, I think the answer to that is yes, because, while, Biden is on the one side making these gestures to China, I think there's also a very big emphasis on moving global NATO in the Pacific. You have the tensions around this Philippine island, which is sort of a ridiculous conflict, but it is the where the Philippine ship went under, and on this shoal. There's still, the effort to maintain that. China is trying to prevent that. So, these are just territorial squabbles which are being played up for geopolitical reasons. And then you have AUKUS, which is the military alliance between the United States, Australia, and the British, which China also regards as a major provocation. And so I think, again, as long as you are thinking in terms of, controlling territory, moving NATO as a global NATO into the Pacific, I mean, what does NATO have to do in the Pacific? Nothing. It was founded as a defensive alliance for the North Atlantic. It should have dissolved when the Warsaw Pact dissolved. We would be in a much more peaceful world if they would have done so. Instead, it was transformed from a defensive alliance into a more and more offensive alliance, moving east closer and closer to the Russian border, and now moving into the Pacific, closer to the Chinese border. So this global NATO idea is a completely rotten idea, and it should be rejected by anybody who has an interest that humanity survives all of these strategic crises. So I'm unfortunately concerned and pretty sure that this Kishida visit will not be something to be happy about.
All right, let's move to the situation in Southwest Asia. The first question I have on this is, if Palestine were to be given membership status in the United Nations, as was proposed recently on the International Peace Conference call, for example, could Israel prevent it?
I'm not sure. I'm not totally sure. But I think it's very important, because this is something which is supported by the vast majority of countries in the world. I think the United States was not so much in favor of it. But, if we want to end this absolute horror show, which is still a complete powder keg, then the I think it's even coming up this month, the application. I think that would be a major step towards calming down the situation. I mean, it remains a complete powder keg, because on the one side, the IDF forces have pulled out of Gaza to a large extent. Many people are concerned that it's just resting before the next attack occurs. John Kirby just said, that the Israeli government promised to the United States that they would not do anything in respect to Rafah if there was not a face-to-face discussion in Washington between the Biden administration, and presently there are two members of the cabinet, Israeli cabinet in Washington. But on the other side, you have the two coalition partners, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who represent, I think, together 14 votes in the Knesset, and they give Netanyahu a 3-vote majority. They have said that they will pull out of the coalition, bring Netanyahu down, if he agrees to a deal whereby the Hamas is not completely destroyed, and that in their view the operation is not finished. Now that means that Netanyahu is under enormous pressures from all sides. And the danger naturally is looming that, the expansion of the conflict involving Lebanon, involving, direct conflict between Israel and Iran, that is hanging as a sword of Damocles over the whole situation, because that could then really get out of control completely. So the answer to your question is yes. I think Palestine should be given statehood immediately, and hopefully the UN Security Council would find more unity to implement whatever it decides.
And also, just a follow-up to that, if Palestine does become a member of the United Nations, would this open up the possibility to make it more likely that a fund could be set up to carry through the Oasis Plan?
It definitely would help. Since you mentioned the Oasis Plan, I can only invite all of you, our viewers, to absolutely participate in our upcoming Saturday conference on the Oasis Plan. This is coming along very nicely. We have gained the commitment of participation of extremely important speakers. We have several ambassadors from the region, Southwest Asia, from the BRICS countries, and we have some excellent experts on nuclear energy, water management, infrastructure. So I think that the perspective of having a visionary plan for Southwest Asia as a whole, to have peace through development, this will become much more real in the eyes of many people, because what is the alternative? If you don't inject a different idea, then the cycle of violence, of terrorism, counterterrorism, war, counter-war, is turning this region into hell, in the best case for decades, in the worst case into a regional war and beyond. But on the other side, given the fact that the world is really at the edge of either a new era of mankind or a global war, one can only hope that the idea of making peace through development, of greening the deserts, all you need really is lots of fresh water through a variety of means, canals. You can access aquifers. You can try to impact the weather systems through ionization of the atmosphere. You can do all kinds of things in terms of desalination of large amounts of ocean water. But greening the deserts, creating more water, which has been a fight among many nations in the region. That is the way to have peace. And I can imagine that all of Southwest Asia in a few years can look like the coastal strip of the Emirates and Dubai, which I visited once. And it's amazing what you can do with water in some region which was desert before. You can make it lush gardens, lush agriculture, lush forests, and that is where we have to go.
Now there's a question from John North, who writes, "It has been disclosed that artificial intelligence is being used by Israel in the conflict in Gaza. I assume this is a reference to the idea that it's being used for targeting and figuring out who's Hamas and so on." And then he asks, "We can assume that the US is also using it, can't we?"
Well, I did not get any privileged information on this point, but I know this has been made an issue. It is one of the most evil and satanic ways of using modern technology. Artificial intelligence can have a very profitable role, but if it's used for targeting of people, for assassination, I think it is, really the absolute business card of the most evil you can imagine.
Now, one question on Ukraine. The House is under enormous pressure, the U.S. House of Representatives, to pass the Biden $60 billion Ukraine bill to provide more aid and weapons and so on. There's apparently some wobble in the speaker. The Speaker Johnson had said it would not pass, and now he's trying to figure out a way to get the money. And so the question comes up, you just had David Cameron, the British Foreign Secretary, in Washington to try and push for this. What would happen with the situation in the European countries if the US did not provide the money? Would there be a commitment from Europe, as they claim there would be, to provide enough money to keep the war going?
Well, I think there is right now an effort to militarize the budgets of Europe, and in Germany there's even a push to loosen the debt brake, which is in the constitution, for military build-up, for weapons commitments to Ukraine. It's just completely insane. Germany is falling apart. The industry is in a free fall. There is no money for repair of desolate infrastructure. I mean, it's completely insane. And I can only hope that, there is a rethinking, hopefully this Chinese initiative will change the dynamic altogether. But, look at the situation with Nicaragua having filed an accusation in Den Haag against Germany because of the weapon sales of Germany to Israel. And, this was negotiated in Den Haag Monday and Tuesday of this week. And, the German position is untenable. I listened to some radio reports, and all they were discussing is how you get out of this by technical reasons, that it's not possible to have a legal case because of this and that article. That totally misses the point. The point is that some of these commentators reflected very clearly they're not outraged because of what is happening, genocide, crimes of war crimes. They're not concerned about the suffering of the Palestinians. They're not concerned about what happens to the whole region and the world as a result of it. What they are worried about is, our reputation in the global south is suffering. All this media coverage we did not anticipate. This shows you that there is no concern about the real issues, but just the reputation. But I think the political establishments will not get around the fact that the image of Germany is already severely damaged because of this whole situation. And in order to repair it and to re-establish a positive relation with the global south, which after all represent 85% of the human population, does require some rethinking in Germany. And people of all political stripes are really called upon to participate in such a rethinking, because it's not the question just that this present government is a really problematic one, especially if you look at the green element in it and the FDP for that matter as well. But the opposition is not so much different. So Germany really needs to rethink this present course of action, where it has allowed itself to become a complete, colonial subject of the present unipolar world to be. So I think that Germany really needs to shape up and change its outlook.
On the question of Germany, the daily video update that I do, I took up this question of the effect of the war and the sanctions and so on the German economy. So people can find that at the LaRoucheOrganization.com. Now, Helga, we do have a couple of comments that are useful in terms of the organizing. One is County Commissioner in Minnesota, Bob Van Hee. He points out that he's been organizing with the LaRouche movement for 35 plus years. He said he's just not sure what's going on with the population. They're hot and cold. They want to do something, then they're whining. And he said that people must take responsibility as a citizen to actually fight for the common good. And he said, thank you for the ideas that we need for this. Then we have from, I think it's Batifola from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He says the Congo needs an Oasis Plan as well. That would bring a much awaited peace in the region between a number of neighboring countries, so countries can finally get back on their feet. Now, I have a final question for you. It's an interesting one. It's from Pat Moulton, who was expressing her amazement at the response to the solar eclipse that was seen in the United States I think it was yesterday. She said people got out of their homes, their cars, their offices, and looked to the heavens. And she said, God was speaking from heaven. Helga, what did you hear?
Oh, I heard an encouragement for what we are doing. No, I'm kidding. I think that the usefulness of such natural events is that it does indeed force people to lift up the eyes to the skies, because normally when people run through the malls, shopping malls or Fußgängerzone or whatever, they look at the floor, or they look at the shopping windows, or they look at some other non-important matters. But when something like this occurs, people are getting excited, and they start to have at least a glimpse of the largeness of the universe, and maybe they even think that we are now aware of at least 2 trillion galaxies, which I always find the most mind-boggling idea, because it just puts the whole thing in the right perspective, that we are the human species, we are part of this wonderful universe, but we still know only a tiny fraction of it. And we should take events like this as an encouragement to study, more deeply, both such things like Johannes Kepler, but also, NASA projects, what is the latest from the James Webb telescope, and things like that, because that helps us to become more human.
And that's really important. Helga, we have, as you mentioned, this Saturday, starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, the Schiller Institute Conference on Your Husband's Oasis Plan as a starting point for transforming the world to a development architecture. Anything you want to say in closing on why people should participate?
Yes, because that is the only concrete proposal on the table for peace in Southwest Asia. China has made a proposal already almost 2 years ago, but there was unfortunately not much concrete follow-up. While this Oasis Plan is an idea which was forwarded for the first time by Lyndon LaRouche in 1975, and more recently, because of the circumstances of the war, we actualized it, and we are now engaged with a lot of scientists from many countries who are all excited and agree that the production of lots of fresh water as a peace agreement among the different nations would be the way out. So we plan this conference to be not just a one-time event, but we want to present an approach how to solve the problem by bringing the scientists from all countries involved to share their knowledge, to explore all options of creating water in a region which is entirely sand. I mean, if you look at the map, almost the entire Southwest Asia is desert, desert, desert. And you cannot have a livable home for the Palestinians, nor any hope for the other countries which are in terrible conditions, such as Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, but to create more water. So this is very exciting because it is one of these things which can be changed by man. And that is why I would urge you to not only watch this and participate in the conference on Saturday, but to share the invitation to as many of your friends, social media, emails, whatnot, because this can become an absolute turning point for a situation which is extremely horrible and it should never have happened. But this is the moment to start a chapter for a better future.
And you can find the link for this to register and to send to others so they would register at the schillerinstitute.com website. So Helga, thanks once again for joining us this week. And I, for one, will see you on Saturday.
Yes, I hope I see you too. I mean, you out there.